Hello and welcome to AA Beyond Belief podcast. I'm your host, John S. Today I'll be speaking with Benn B about steps 6 and 7, which read, "We're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character and humbly ask Him to remove our shortcomings." Now, how are a couple of atheists going to do anything with these steps? Hey Ben, how you doing?
Pretty good, John. How have you been?
Excellent. Nice to have you here again. Talk about the steps. It'll be interesting to see how this goes. We've got, I thought that we might be able to cover steps 6 and 7 in one podcast, but we'll see. You never know what happens once we start talking about these things. I was reading the steps last night from the 12 and 12, and I have kind of an interesting history with the 12 and 12. You know, I've been reading these books for 28 years. And for the most of the time that I've been in the program, I used to really like the 12 and 12. I used to think that it went a lot more in depth than the big book. And I felt that it covered a lot of, psychological aspects of the steps. But now that I read them, I mean, it's really hard to find anything here that doesn't have to do with God. Mm-hmm. And it was really difficult to read. So anyway, step 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. What do you think about that step? Ben, go ahead and give me your experience and thoughts.
The first thing I notice about it is it kind of reminds me of step 2. It doesn't even sound like a step at all. It sounds more like a declaration of where you get to. Like we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. It's almost like, to paraphrase that, it's like, are you sure you're really ready to do something about this, or are you ready to change? I don't know. Just in wording, it doesn't even sound like a step, but that's probably trying to pick it apart. I think you and I have talked about this before, but it is. It's about, to me, I look at it as like it's a warning. Okay, here comes some real action of change you're going to have to take part in. We've just got done defining, for lack of a better word, our character defects, and now are you ready to do something about it? I don't believe. The book kind of doubles down on itself too, or I should say doubles back on itself. It's like it tells you that God can remove them, but then it also tells you later that you have to do work. So I don't know. I had a tough time reading through this again, this week as well. So I'm with you there. Yeah. But I wrote down when I was taking notes, like, are you really sure you want to do this? That's what I think of when I hear step 6.
Yeah. These steps, could actually, be used as evidence that there really isn't a God. Because anytime you go to AA meeting, when they talk about step 6 and 7, everybody always says, well, God hasn't removed my character defects. God has not, He never removes your character defects. Yeah, so it makes it, maybe they should start thinking, why isn't God removing my character defects?
Yeah, for sure.
Could it be that there isn't? I don't know. Who knows? Anyway.
You'll hear people use the language from this 12 by 12 too, that will say like, oh, I must love that character defect so much that I hold on to it. That was some of the language in here too. Right. It's like, right. It's always back on you, bad human, hanging on to the defect. If only you would let go, then God could remove it. Well, yeah. I thought God was all powerful and could do whatever. Yeah. But I don't know.
Anyway, we're using logic. We shouldn't.
Yes. Sorry.
But anyway, the way I saw the steps from a secular perspective anyway, because when I started writing them out, and I can't remember exactly how I worded it, but pretty much the way that you said it is I became willing to change these things that I learned about myself. I became willing to build character and improve. And step 7 to me was just being persistent throughout my life with being willing to work on these things. And for me, that doesn't mean anything other than just being aware of that I need to grow as a human being and to avail myself to the help that is out there, whether that be, a counselor, a therapist, or an AA meeting or a sponsor or whatever. Just to know that, I don't need to go through life alone, and I'm not perfect, and I can certainly, continue to build character and try to be a better person.
Absolutely. That's well stated. I would agree with that wholeheartedly. And the steps bring you this far. It's like they assume that we've just been totally blind to everything about ourselves up until we walk in the rooms, I guess, and partake in this. And so I suppose, exactly like you said, this is the part that says we need to, like you said, in a secular sense, it's time to start actively working on ourselves. It's, the 12 by 12 even says this separates the men from the boys. Now, all that old lingo I don't know about, but it really is. This is what it comes down to. It's not necessarily about the drinking. It's about taking a look at the things. And the 12 by 12 even said it at, I can't remember if it was 6 or 7, but that it said something about the defects that have led to our drinking problem. Mm-hmm. It kind of goes back and forth on blaming alcohol and not blaming alcohol. And, that when I read that, I really liked that part too. So this is engaging in the change and staying engaged in the change. When I look at all my efforts to either control my drinking or stop drinking before I came to AA, what I basically did was I got to a place and then I quit doing what I was doing that was working for me. Mm-hmm. And I see a parallel with a lot of those things as to what we're asked to do in AA. I mean, I think they're the exact same things, but I think my participation in AA and ongoing participation just keeps me on top of these things, keeps me being aware, and then I can do something about them. And the book also talks about humility, I think in step 7, mm-hmm. the 12 by 12 does. And I can catch myself before I get humiliated, mm-hmm. before I do something stupid and then have to find humility that way. I can catch myself when I'm getting a little loud of myself.
Yeah. Well, the women are lucky, since this step is the one that separates the men from the boys. I guess the women don't have to worry about this one, do they?
No.
You're off the hook on this, ladies.
Right. Yeah.
This is about being a man. That's what this step is about.
Yeah. I think, I was looking at the bottom of the first page of step 6 too, and it talks about all these, obsessions being lifted straight off me. And it's, I do doubt that that's true for people. I think it helps people to sometimes make it sound magical like that, but I wonder if when people come into the rooms and they've been working on things, if they haven't immediately changed like that, it can be kind of disheartening. And it has not been my experience. Those character defects or things I need to work on, they're slowly changing. We hear the old line that we didn't get sick overnight. We're not going to get better overnight. Yeah. That's been more my experience. And the magical thinking, I think, can be dangerous. To me, it's the same type of thinking that got us in trouble in the first place. It's like that instant gratification thinking of, I can take a drink and feel better right now, or I can actually take time, work on my crap, put in some investment over time and get better slowly. Cause really, if you look at it as a disease concept and a brain disease, it's that instant gratification that's the problem. We keep putting off dealing with what we have to deal with, and, it just keeps building up. Yeah. So it's a slow process, I've found.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I also like the discussion in there about character building, and I always did kind of like that. It kind of made sense to me because if you go through the steps and you're really honest about yourself and you find that, that you've got some things to work on. I mean, I'm not saying that we're bad characters, but there's nothing wrong with building character. There's nothing wrong with improving your character. And I think that's a worthy thing to do. I'm not so certain that it's really necessary to do to stay sober, but it doesn't hurt. Mm-hmm. I like to think that it's a good way of being honest with myself about, what kind of a person am I? How am I treating other people? Am I ethical? Am I kind? Am I caring about others? And to what extent am I? So I kind of agree with that. And I also kind of like the concept. I found it interesting anyway and we've talked about this. Actually, we talked about it in step 4, I think, that our problem was allowing our natural instincts to take on more importance than we should give them. Something along those lines, which I think is kind of interesting. I can't remember exactly how they worded that.
No, that's pretty close, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah, here it says, since most of us are born with an abundance of natural desires, it isn't strange that we often let these far exceed their intended purpose. When they drive us blindly, or we willfully demand that they supply us with more satisfaction or pleasures than are possible or due us, that is the point at which we depart from the degree of perfection that God wishes for us here on earth. See, they could have left off that last sentence, but that whole part about, I guess the point that it's trying to make is this isn't a matter of being a good person or a bad person. This is a matter of being a human being, an animal, an organism that that has evolved with these natural instincts for survival, for reproduction, for companionship, for all these different natural instincts that we have just as human animals. And sometimes, we can get carried away with these things. And one benefit of being a human being is we can stop and think and have some degree of control over these things. And it's kind of helpful for me to understand, and I learned this from steps, 4 and 5, that, I have a real strong need for security. And that doesn't mean that I'm a weak person or bad or anything like that. It just means that probably all animals have a need for security. And sometimes, and I might take that need for security to the extreme, and it can hurt my relationships with other people.
Absolutely.
That's good to be aware of that.
No, you're right on about that. And, to bounce off of what you said into step 6 in the 12 by 12, they talk about defying their instinctive desire for self-preservation. They seem bent upon self-destruction, talking about us destroying our lives with alcohol. And, if you look at the science of the brain, it makes sense. Because I know I've said this on another one of our podcasts, but the part of your brain that lies with these instincts for this self-preservation and security and safety and all that stuff is also the part of the brain that starts to believe that it needs alcohol. So when that starts taking precedent and overriding all those other perceived needs, that's where the chronicity of alcohol comes, and it becomes less. Well, I don't think it ever is a moral thing, but our book flips back and forth between disease, allergy, and then moral tone. So we sit there and the book sometimes says like, oh, you have let your need for self-survival be overridden by your choice to drink. But it is science. It is science that's why it just makes sense. But it's like the book kind of angles it as towards like it's going to shame us into waking up to that. But if it truly is a disease, it's not that easy, right?
Yeah. So you mentioned that before. Can you explain that again? It's like the science behind that is about how can you explain that again?
Yeah. The part of your brain that becomes more physically dependent on alcohol is very near your instincts, or where your instincts lie is what they think they've decided and determined so far. Okay. Obviously, science is always evolving. And then if you think about it, the prefrontal cortex part of your front of your brain is what your instincts, think of it as like a lightning bolt or a message shoots out towards that prefrontal cortex from your instincts, like mate with this person, have sex now, eat, consume, this, that. And then your prefrontal cortex is where everything that you learn is kind of not everything that you learn, but it's like where your morals lie, or the part of your brain that says maybe that isn't a good idea. It like provides the bounce back from that instinct part of your brain. So when the instinct part of your brain becomes so physically dependent on alcohol, it kind of overrides that. But also the effect that alcohol has on our system is the first thing it does is it numbs out that prefrontal cortex. Okay. So that's why we tend to make bad decisions, even if you're not an alcoholic. That's why you tend to make bad decisions when you're drunk. You drive home because it's that part of your brain is numbed out that says it's not a good idea to drive home completely shit-faced.
Absolutely.
Or, not to ever justify anyone taking advantage of someone else, but it's also why bad things happen sexually, interact with people at times too. So
that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally does. And it's also the last part of your brain that develops. They say your prefrontal cortex isn't really fully developed, or that frontal cortex isn't fully developed until you're 25. So they would say ideally all of us would stay away from any mind-altering chemical until you're 25. Because it can interfere with the development of that frontal part of your brain that says this isn't such a good idea. Okay. Which it's also probably why people who start to drink at a younger age are more apt to become alcoholics. Yeah, yeah. So you've influenced that frontal part of your brain and its development by introducing chemicals into your body too soon.
That's scary. That's actually my case, and I bet you anything. I was born in 1962, and back then, people didn't know that you couldn't drink when you were pregnant.
Yeah.
I would be surprised if I was having some as a fetus, but
yeah,
I started drinking so young. I mean, I remember, I must have been at least 8. My parents would have these parties, and I would go downstairs in the morning after the party, and I would drink the leftover glasses of scotch or bourbon or whatever that was left out from the night before. That's really odd behavior for an 8-year-old.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's what I did. And also I would smoke the cigarettes that were hanging around the house.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's kind of weird. But yeah, I did, at a very early age, I kind of latched on to alcohol. But of course I didn't drink all that time until I got into high school. But man, it definitely took a hold of me very almost immediately. And, so by the time I was 25, it was game over.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. As I was reading through the 12 by 12 also, I kind of noticed it made me think of how I said this earlier. The goal is to just stay working on our issues. And there's so much all or nothing thinking throughout our literature too. And sometimes we need to work on getting rid of that kind of thinking in our life. I'll use like a diet, for example. Like if I'm going to start eating better, for some reason, I always seem to tell myself I'll start on Monday. I did that with my drinking too. After the weekend, I'll start not drinking on Monday. And then as soon as if I drank, Tuesday or Wednesday, I'd be like, well, screw it. I'll start again on next Monday. And then it'd be like party on the rest of the week. And I can have a tendency to do that with food now too. So I think the goal is to get out of that all or nothing thinking. Whereas like, what's so magical about Monday, right?
Right.
Or, and it's about just staying engaged and getting better and growing and changing. And if I fall off the wagon or if I cheat on my diet, I'm not doing myself or anything any favors by just giving myself the justification, rationalization to keep doing what I'm doing. So I think some of that all or nothing thinking is what needs to be addressed too.
Yeah. And maybe this step doesn't do a very good job with that in some ways because I remember in my old group, we used to talk about this a lot, is that they always say, in this step, you really want to shoot to have all defects removed. You want perfection is what you're really shooting for, even though you aren't going to get it.
Right.
But they used to say at my old home group that if you want to make $1 million, don't set your goal to make $1 million. Set your goal to make 5 million or whatever. That that way, if you don't meet your goal, it's something. And back then, it used to make sense to me. So that's what they would say is that, even though you might not have all of your defects removed, shoot to have them all removed. And that way you'll be, that much further ahead. I don't know. It's kind of weird. Yeah.
I can get behind that thinking on some level, but again, it's that all or nothing thinking, and it's I don't know. It's something about it is just about staying engaged in the process of all this, I think.
Yeah, and maybe the whole idea of having these things removed isn't a good idea anyway. That's a weird concept because that's the way they're actually talking. You have a deity who is going to remove these things.
Right.
We don't really see things that way. Well, the way we see things is that we have character traits. We have things about us that we want to improve, and we ourselves have to work on those things throughout our lifetime. And we know that we're never going to have these things removed. They're not going to be taken away. I mean, we're always going to have these desires or wants or needs. It's just a matter of understanding what those things are and putting things into perspective. It's not a matter of removing them. What are they talking about anyway?
Right.
It is kind of weird.
Yeah. And the whole, shooting to have things improve in our life and improve ourselves is a good thing. Now, again, not everything's going to change, but I think it's more about the commitment of it, right? It's like saying, hey, what do you have to change to stay sober? Well, sometimes people will say everything, but I don't think the text actually says you need to be willing to change anything and everything. Yeah. It doesn't say that you have to. But when we're shooting for it, it's like an act of commitment, I think. And I suppose the way this step works for people that believe in God, it's not my job to judge it, but I'm going to, is because for some people that is an act of commitment. It's saying I'm giving over take it from me, that's what allows them to give something up. So I don't, if that's what somebody needs to do to believe that this change can happen, more power to them. But the book even warns us it doesn't alleviate us from our responsibility of taking action.
I can see that. And those people have the freedom that they exercise all the time to express that in the meetings, whereas you and I would have a difficult time expressing our view of these steps, which does not involve letting go to a deity, but somehow just, letting go without having to turn it over to some damn God. But no, I hear you.
Well, and it talks too on page 66 and 67, talks about what we must recognize now is that we exult in some of our defects. We really love them. Who, for example, doesn't like to feel just a little superior to the next fellow, or even quite a lot superior? Isn't it true that we like to let greed masquerade as ambition? To think of liking lust seems impossible, but how many men and women speak love with their lips and believe what they say so that they can hide lust in a dark corner of their minds? Man, Bill was really obsessed with sex on some level, I think.
Yeah.
And even while staying within conventional bounds, many people have to admit that their imaginary sex excursions are apt to be all dressed up as dreams of romance. Now, I wrote down in my book, there's some truth here. It's like there is that thing about we like to feel superior to the next fellow. And I do think in recovery, it's about finding our authentic walk and what we want to be ours and what we want to be without having to bounce that off of a comparison with someone else. I can get behind that part of this saying for sure, or this part of the 12 by 12. But then it's like thought police. It's like, well, I know those men and women speak of love, but they have lust in their hearts. It's just like, I don't know. Do we need to judge all that?
Yeah. That's the whole concept of lust. I don't know. I guess I don't know. I'm with you on that. I don't. That's probably borrowed from religion. In fact, I was kind of going through highlighting some of these things and lust is mentioned a couple of times. Gluttony is mentioned. Anger is mentioned. Sloth or procrastination. These are some of the basic things. And I'm sure there's some religious background behind looking at these particular things. Not to say that there isn't probably some benefit to looking at these behaviors. The one thing that I could relate to, I guess, is the self-righteous anger and how dangerous that could be. I can buy into that, I think, because I know it's really difficult, anger for me can almost be like a drug because it produces a certain energy within me if I really allow myself to get worked up about something. And if that anger later becomes a resentment where I'm constantly thinking about it and reliving that feeling, it begins to distort my perception of reality. And it begins to influence my relationships with other people who aren't even connected with that anger. And it also puts me in a kind of a weird spot where if I'm that far out of touch with reality, it's not that big of a stretch to pick up a drink. That's kind of my feeling about it. The self-righteous anger is so difficult because, damn it, I'm right. This person's done something wrong to me. And it's kind of hard to shut that off, because it to a certain extent, I like being right. And I like to replay that in my head or even in conversation with other people to let them know, how right I was and how I showed this person whatever. But still I have that emotion going on that's knotting me up inside. So I think it's still, it's something I need to look at and be careful and not allow myself to get too wrapped up in that. So what if I'm right?
Right.
Big deal. Let it go. Don't have to keep reliving the fight.
Well, and I don't know about you, but that's the way I feel sometimes when I run into these discussions with the dogmatists, either online or in person. It's like I want to tell them how right I am and how wrong they are. I don't even know that I want to. I feel like that's what they want to do to me. I just want to have the right to have my own interpretation about this stuff and my own experience. But it feels like for many of them, if my experience is different than theirs, then I get accused of either not being a real alcoholic or not working the steps the right way, or I didn't have someone walk me through it the right way or something like that. And it seems like, I don't know, the dogmatists seem to want to pigeonhole and make this doorway so very narrow into AA that it's like, I don't know. It's like they want to control who's in there to keep it pure or something.
Yeah.
And it's like, I just don't get it. I get very frustrated, and I do get that self-righteous anger going on, and I need to watch it.
It is weird. And Facebook in particular, because there's so many AA, secret AA groups on Facebook, and, oh boy. And I think, I don't know if it's, if what I'm seeing on Facebook is what is spilling over from the rooms of AA, or vice versa. If it's Facebook, is Facebook conversations filtering their way into the rooms of AA, or is it the AA stuff, or maybe it's a little bit of both. But I have seen like some crazy stuff on Facebook where people get this real narrow interpretation of the steps and saying that people aren't real alcoholics and don't belong. But unfortunately, and I see that on Facebook all the time, but I've also seen it happen in real life in AA too. And it makes me angry as well. And like you say, I just have to, and Facebook, it's one thing. You can sit there and argue with people, and I guess it's almost entertainment. But when you're in the rooms of AA, you're talking about people's lives.
Right.
And it's a whole different thing. And you don't want to mess around with that, I don't think. Yeah,
the Facebook and online groups are kind of a shit show, because I think anybody can say whatever, and they can make up multiple accounts.
You don't even know who the hell you're talking to, really.
No way. But yeah, it does get heated in there, and I need to be careful to not think that that's reality in the rooms, because I had coffee with a guy a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about that, and just AA in general, and the fundamentalists, and he said, yeah, but that's a really small number of people in AA, and for the most part, he is right. But then him and I got into a discussion just about some of the concerns about AA and things like that, and it just like shut down the conversation right away. We were having a really nice conversation, and as soon as I brought up any doubt about any dogma in AA, I mean, it was a very light doubt. I just wanted to have a discussion about it, and it was like, wow. I mean, I felt like I was threatening his sobriety just to even bring up that there's something about AA that might not be the most great thing in the world.
There are a lot more of them. The dogmatists and just if I don't even like these Pacific group people. I don't know if I'd call them dogmatists, but they're definitely cultish. Maybe they are dogmatists. Do these people, I guess they must have a real, I don't know what, I have to understand these people a little bit better, these Pacific groups. But anyway, I was talking to this guy last night from Japan, and he says the Pacific group has made a big presence over there in Japan.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And the whole fellowship in Japan is kind of split, and you've got the back to basics people, you've got the Pacific group people, and then you have just your regular, milquetoast kind of AA folks. But even in Japan, those Pacific group people have infiltrated. It's almost like they're doing it on purpose. Like they have to spread their brand of AA around. I wonder if it's like an intentional thing or not. It's weird, I find.
Yeah, I don't know. So much for traction rather than promotion, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. So anyway, there is a bunch of that out there. I don't know where I came.
I think over here it really parallels with what's going on politically in our world right now too, and the fear over this next election, and some of the people with the return to want my country back and make America great again. I think there's an underlying fear. I mean, different things in our literature will even say, AA is just a reflection of the culture that
that's true.
It's made up of all the people from our society. So
yeah, that's true. So you can't really, that's very, very true. And maybe as our society becomes more divided, then AA itself, becomes more divided. So, and we have our own, and the way that everything is now, like, if you're liberal, you're going to watch this television station, or you're going to read this newspaper. If you're conservative, you're going to watch a different television station. You're going to read a different newspaper.
Right.
You're going to belong to a different Facebook group so people now, instead of just being thrown into having one newspaper that everybody reads, or one news station that everybody listens to, or just one place where people get together, now people can get in their own individual silos, and they're doing that in AA too. So AA is just a reflection of what's happening in the greater society. We have our own little silos of AA, and we have our own little silos of other people in society.
And I do think one great thing about AA is that it's supposed to not be, we don't divide ourselves that way. I mean, and for the most part, it tends to be true, but I mean, I do feel like there's a fracturing going on within AA.
Yeah, there is.
A few more things on step 6 in the 12 by 12 I wanted to note after we kind of got off track here. That's kind of my fault. But it talks about the only urgent thing is that we make a beginning and keep trying. I thought that's very measured advice. Very, very good. And then the only question will be, are we ready? So, I mean, that's kind of boils down what step 6 all about. Are we entirely ready?
Yep.
It's suggested that we ought to become entirely willing to aim towards perfection. That goes on what you were mentioning earlier. And then at the end, it starts to talk about our minds closing against the grace of God. And then it says, delay is dangerous and rebellion may be fatal. It's, it's like using these fear tactics to scare us into doing what we need to do. And I've just found when I was a counselor and working with people, sponsoring them, that fear almost has never worked. I mean, I'm not saying I've never used it with a sponsee, but it almost, I just don't find that it works, especially with an active alcoholic. I don't think you can scare an active alcoholic into getting sober. It's like, I have relatives who have some health problems, and you can tell them as much as you want, like, oh, you're carrying a lot of edema, you're swelling up. It might have had to do with the fact you had 2.5 bottles of wine last night. Oh, well, I didn't have that much. Or, it's like, I don't think fear works that well. But I do think being welcoming and inclusive and making people feel comfortable and welcome, I do think that does work.
I do too. That's the strength of AA when we do that right.
Yep.
So what do you think about this discussion of humility in step 7?
Some of it I was like, wow, this is really great. I do think humility is an important thing, especially for those of us who struggled with addiction. That it's, again, I don't always think that everybody that walks into the room struggling with alcohol is somebody who's just this just a selfish person just running over everybody in their lives. I mean, some of the people I sponsor are kind of the meeker, lower tone people who are not very assertive. But I do think humility is an important thing to nurture within ourselves. And I think the community of AA can help foster that within people. And just being humble of nature and being of service and caring about other people and being able to put myself in other people's shoes. I mean, I think all that stuff assists me with being more humble and having some humility. I don't know. What's your experience?
Well, I don't know. It's coming into AA is the first time I ever started thinking about humility. And at my old home group, it was a huge, big deal. And the whole concept of humility has weaved its way into the fiber of who I am as a person. And sometimes I don't know. Sometimes I think it's maybe too much because, like, especially now with what I'm doing online. I wonder sometimes, am I not being humble here? Why do I have to post, that I'm eating sushi on Facebook? Why do I have to, why do I think that everybody wants to hear what I think or say or do or whatever? And I don't know, it kind of bugs me sometimes, because I used to be a very quiet person, even before I got to AA, even in my drinking. I didn't really know a whole lot of people. I didn't hang out with a lot of people. I just drank, I wasn't a social person at all. And then even, my first year or two in AA, I was very, quiet. I was not one that, I didn't have a lot of self-esteem or whatever. And that's not humility in itself, right? But then what happened to me is I got healthy and I started having some good self-esteem. And now suddenly I have to balance that self-esteem with not being a total, jerk. And I don't know. I worry about that. So maybe, and it might just be my own perception of myself. Maybe other people don't see it that way. But, sometimes even when I speak in an AA meeting, it's like, I feel like, I need to make sure I don't talk about myself too much. But how can you not talk about yourself?
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's something else. But I do believe, I guess, the concept of humility. I mean, I understand what it's saying. Like when I made that admission that I'm an alcoholic, that was a humbling admission, but it was done from being humiliated. It was done from, having experiences in my life that just caused me to give up. But there's another degree of humility, which means that, just humility working for humility for the sake of humility, not for any other reason, but just to be, I guess humility being having the right perspective about myself. So in other words, I'm not a piece of shit and I'm not I'm not a wonderful, I'm not the king of the world or whatever. I'm just a regular guy, just having the right perspective about who I am and what I'm doing. That is probably what humility is. And it's probably a good, healthy place to be, I guess.
Yeah, very much so. I agree with you too. Once we do get some esteem, I sometimes wonder if there's a lot of shame and just, I don't know, stuff that goes around the room sometimes. It's like, if you start feeling too good about yourself, it's like people are like, oh, you better be careful. It's like, it's almost like, don't you dare be happy. It's like, I don't know. There's, like you're saying, there's a balance, and I've got to bounce between those two things. I got to get out of those extremes where I'm hating myself for something that I didn't even do versus thinking I'm the greatest person in the room and I'm trying to tell somebody else how to do it. But like you said, all we all have is our own experience. And that's what I have to speak from when I talk. If I get into something where I'm telling people how to do something or whatnot, not just saying how I do it and what my experience has been, that's where I get in trouble, I think. And I suppose I can get that self-righteousness going about what I feel like I've learned, or I suppose being a counselor before, I feel like I'm educated in some of that stuff, but it all has to do with my motive. Like, what am I trying to do? Am I trying to prove to people that I know something about something, or am I just trying to share my experience so that it may help somebody else? It's all about where it's coming from. I had a guy the other day, we all went out to coffee, and he never said anything to me after the meeting, which I wouldn't expect him to, but he was somebody who struggled with mental illness in the rooms. And so I don't know, I had said at the meeting, somebody was going off about how you shouldn't use medications in AA and all that stuff, and I stuck up my next share. I mean, it was probably kind of rude, but I said, we need to be really careful what we say about people on medication or not in here, because there's some people who practically need to be on something just to not want to end their life.
Right.
Or to even be able to be in this room and work steps and be able to have fellowship with all of us. And, and then he said, Ben, I quoted you the other day in a meeting. And I was like, what? And he goes, yeah, I used that quote where you said some people need to be on things just to be able to be here and do the deal. And that made me feel really good, because I stuck up for what I felt was right and true. And I also felt like I stuck up for what AA says about being on medication.
Absolutely.
So I don't ever want to speak from what I think is right, I guess. But in that case, it was good that I said something, because you never know how many people are sitting in the room on an antidepressant or, maybe some other psych med or, and it's just, it can just alienate people. And I think those people just kind of carefully just shuffle off and disappear one day. And the whole line is, well, they didn't want to do what they wanted to do. It's like, no, I think that tone around the rooms just chases people off eventually. Yeah.
So, when they were talking about humility, and they must have thought it was an important thing, I guess. Do you think there's something to us when we are active in our addictions, that something happens to our ego? Do we become really egocentric to a certain extent? I guess I think that, well, maybe we do think about ourselves a lot, because we're always having to think about the next fix, the next drug, the next drink, and how we're going to get out of this problem or that problem. So I don't know. What do you think? Is there a need to kind of get ourselves into right size to a certain extent when we're first getting clean?
Yeah, I do think so. I think that looks different for everyone. It's like an obsession with self, I think. And for some of us, the obsession with self is trying to tell everybody else they're wrong and we're right. Yeah. And for others of us, our obsession with self is that, we think everybody's talking about us, or that everybody else is right. We're wrong. So
there's a certain amount of paranoia that happens when you're an alcoholic or drug addict, where you do kind of think that way when you're actively using, don't you?
For sure. I mean, I can remember even the ways it would overtake my my day, even when I was just drinking heavy on a weekend. It would be, maybe I'd go in Sunday to like a 7-Eleven and buy a soda or something, and I'd hand them a $20 bill and my hand would be jittery or shaking, and I'd be like, oh crap, they noticed. And most people don't give a shit. I mean, it's like they maybe didn't even notice at all, or I wasn't that shaky, I just felt shaky inside. Or it's like that obsession with self. And I can remember, sometimes on a super hungover day, it would be like, just to get out of the house and go get something to eat, it just felt like I'd get out and I got to get back home. Like, I just felt so uptight and so nervous. It's like that obsession with self. So there's definitely something to that, but I think we all come at different angles.
Yeah.
Getting out of that and getting more humble, because sometimes it's like, Ben, nobody gives a shit about you in a good way. I don't mean like nobody gives a shit about you, you're a piece of shit, but like you're not that freaking important.
Right.
And that's the great thing about AA too. I can come in and be one of many, you know, maybe one day I'm having a good day and somebody else is having a bad day, and it gets me back humble and realizing like, Ben, you know, feel fortunate you're having a nice day today, you know, not to use somebody else's calamity in that way, because I think that's rude, but there's something very good that can happen in AA where it just keeps you centered and right sized. That's healthy. I definitely think that's healthy. And that is humility.
Yeah. That's how I see it. That's how I see it. It's just having the right perspective about yourself, and there probably is a need for it, you know, when we first get in there. You know, I've seen, you know, not wanting to judge other people, but I've seen varying degrees of you know, egos of people that come into the rooms, and that's for sure. And that could just be their personality, not necessarily the disease of alcoholism or drug addiction. But I came in you know after having a good 5, 6, 7 years of some pretty serious drinking. And I think it was just natural for me to always have to think about myself a lot, because I was always needing to either hide something from somebody or get that next drink, or, you know, so, you know, things are different now. I don't have to think like that. I don't, you know, I can think of other people, and I do think about other people. And sometimes I'll catch myself doing that. And it does kind of surprise me that, wow, you know, I'm really actually thinking about and happy about someone else. It's probably just being a normal person, but it still kind of surprises me when I do that.
Yeah. And it's relieving. Like it gets us out of our own head for a while. And that, what we're worried about at that moment isn't so important. And I still got to watch that today. Like, we've got a new baby, and we're thinking about moving to a different town, getting a different house. And I suppose in AA lingo, my economic security is being threatened. You know, I'm trying to figure out what we can afford and what we can't afford. And if I get too obsessed with that, and I have been lately, and focusing too much on how that is affecting me, it just eats me up. But if I take myself back to what's good for my family, what does my daughter need, what does my wife need, and I start putting myself in other people's shoes, it takes the pressure off me a little bit, and I can make a healthier decision, and not one based out of fear. I mean, it's our decision, not just my decision, but that's something along that same vein there that I need to keep in mind. When I'm just obsessing too much about how things are going to affect me, I get in trouble. Yeah.
No, I agree with that. So when you boil down these 2 steps, step 6 and 7, the way that I would look at them is, it's not really, you know, even in my own experience, I can't say that these were things that I worked. It's not like the step 5 where there was one day and there was a moment in time where you actually get and you do something. These steps weren't like that at all. These steps were more just, you know, kind of the idea that I'm going to continue on with learning about myself and trying to become a healthier person for the rest of my life is just how I see it. And so it's nothing more than an attitude, I guess, is what it is. So if I were sponsoring someone and we got to step 6 and 7, I don't know if I would encourage them to do any reading or anything necessarily. I guess it doesn't hurt to read this stuff and know these things, but I would just talk to him about, you know, just the idea of, you know, carrying on with your recovery for the rest of your life and taking some responsibility for your own mental health and doing whatever you need to do to be a healthy, happier person. But I wouldn't give too much weight to the steps themselves, these 2 steps anyway. Actually, you know, and a lot of us joke about this, they're really filler kind of steps. Because, you know, they were trying to make an even 12. And so that's what they basically did. Now, Bill, I remember reading in Not God by Ernest Kurtz. I think they said that when Bill was doing the steps, that he was trying to break them down to their most simple component. And that's why he took like 6 and made it to 12, because he would try to break them down. But I don't think that's really the case. I think he wanted to have 12, like you have the 12 apostles and the or 12 is the magic number, I think.
Yeah.
That's what
I think they are filler steps,
Yeah.
And then he, extrapolates on them in the 12 by 12. But if you look in the big book, there's 2 paragraphs on these 2 steps, right? Total. 1 paragraph each. Very simple.
Yep. And one of them, like the 7th step, and I didn't even really know it. There's the 7th step prayer. There are actually some groups now that actually say the 7th step prayer in their meetings, which I find kind of bizarre. I was at a meeting once that did that. I don't know. It just seems weird to me to say a prayer in AA language.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah, for sure.
Oh yeah, this isn't a religion.
Yeah. Well,
Let's say the prayer that our founder wrote.
Exactly. Yeah. No, you don't have to do anything here. This isn't a cult, but we're going to stare at you and ask you why you didn't after the meeting.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it's about willingness and then working on things, I think. And, I guess I worked these steps. It was even awkward when I went through this with my sponsor the first time. It was like he didn't really know what the heck to have me do either.
No, mine didn't either.
And so it's again, I've said this before and I know it's not true for everyone, but the steps kind of happened to me as I stayed in AA. I think after I worked through 4 and 5, it's kind of like you've got this stuff in front of you that you've learned about yourself. You can't deny it any longer. And I would say if anything changed from when I came into AA until now, it's that I've gone from kind of being more of a blamer of everything else and looking at everything else wrong in the world. And I still have a tendency to do that. But turning it back around and realizing that, and I think this is 2, 3, it's all the way up to this 7, that the only thing we have control over is ourselves and what we can do differently. It doesn't mean that we don't have any power beyond that. I mean, we can get involved politically in the world. We can get involved in, AA. We can get involved in whatever that helps empower us. But it's about turning inward on some level and being empowered and realizing just how much my thoughts and my actions in the past have colored how I see the world. Yeah. And that if I can look in the mirror and realize that I was part of the problem, now I can be part of the solution, right? It doesn't change until I'm on board. And if I can say anything, that's what AA's helped me to do and continue to do, is stay on board with looking at myself, self-reflection, and being active, like you said, in taking care of myself.
Right.
Rather than avoiding that, because I really think that's what I did for many, many years. Just avoided looking at myself. Yeah. And I'll also say this. I find at different periods of times I've been in AA. Now, I'm not blaming AA, but I wonder if anybody else has ever had this problem. I have wondered, and I think it's been true at different times, if being in AA and being involved in AA has been a continuance of me running away from taking a look at myself sometimes. The process of AA has helped me take a look at myself.
Right.
But then when I've gotten into active sponsoring of other people, it has been really easy for me to take care of everyone else and run away from looking at what I need to take a look at in my own life. And I think I got in a period of doing that for sure. And I mean, maybe that's ego too, thinking I've got the answers for everyone else. But I think AA can provide a way to, and again, it's not AA's fault, but a person can be so engrossed in AA that you use it to avoid looking at the very things that the steps are trying to get you to look at. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It absolutely does make sense. And I went through a period of time like that, a lengthy period of time where I would say, 5, 6, 7, several years in AA where, I don't think I was really stretching myself or growing. I wasn't challenging myself any longer because I was comfortable with, I guess, where I was in my life, which is okay. But I was comfortable with knowing what to say in AA to be accepted. Mm-hmm. And that's what I was doing for the longest time. I guess it was serving a purpose. I mean, I was doing fine in my life. I mean, life was getting better all the time. But, looking back on it, I knew how to operate in meetings so that people would accept me. And the reason I say that, Ben, is because when I stopped doing that, that's when the program really took off for me. So in other words, the last couple of years since I've been involved with the agnostic groups, I've experienced more growth in the last couple of years than I have the last 7, 8 or so, because now I've shaken off the shackles of having to say things that please people, and instead I'm able to really ask myself what these things mean to me. And I'm able to have some pleasure in seeing other people get some benefit out of all of this stuff too. So I don't know. Yeah. So yeah, you can just get comfortable. You can go to meetings and you can say whatever you want to say to, you can learn the lingo of AA pretty quickly. And once you know that lingo, you're in. Yeah.
Well, and what I hear you saying is that you finally got authentic with yourself and it became authentic for you. And I do think that somewhere along the lines, no matter how many years we have, this has to become something that we want for ourselves. It's, I think we get in that place, like you're saying, where you walk the walk and everybody's patting you on the back and everybody thinks you're a good AA member, but it can feel kind of phony sometimes. And until it's like becomes ingrained in what, hey, I am doing this because I want to do this, then it doesn't become real. And that's also, I agree with you. That's what this agnostic atheist, little segment of AA has really helped me with too. Like, hey, it's okay to question this. Whereas in the past, maybe if I would have started questioning, I would have just said, well, fuck this, I'm out of here. I must not be. And I've heard this from some dogmatists too. Well, I guess if you were able to quit just through some, since you don't believe everything that's written in that book and you're able to quit just through some bad circumstances in your life, you must not have been a real alcoholic to begin with. It's like, no, it's like you can deny or find some of this lacking after plenty of investigation and still want to be here and still want to be a part of AA and still want to help people and still want to continue to help yourself. It doesn't have, again, that's that all or nothing thinking. Either you buy into this 100% lock, stock, and barrel or get the hell out of here, And I've run into this. I went to my home group a couple of weeks ago and I haven't been back there since. It's my old home group, but I got chided after the meeting for not being there for newcomers more often. And it was just like, a lot has changed in my life lately, and I'm tired of feeling guilty for everything I do or don't do. And so that was another moment where it's like my life has become more authentically mine. And I've got a child now, I've got a wife, and look, I don't go to as many AA meetings as I used to. I still go. Well, and I mean, on some level, I know too that if I need to be there emotionally for my family, or to help raise a decent daughter I might be helping create the next alcoholic, if I'm not there to help. As far
as I'm concerned, absolutely. As far as I'm concerned, that's the purpose of AA is so that you can do that. I mean, I did the same thing. I went, after 10 years of sobriety, I went back to college and I ended up getting my degree. I got 2 degrees. And during that time, and I was dating a lot more too. During that time, I wasn't going to as many meetings as I was the previous 10 years. And that's cool because that first 10 years, I was preparing myself to build a life for myself that I have today. And I needed to do these things. I needed to read and study and meet people outside of AA. And it was a really good time for me. But that was working the program out in the real world, doing things that I couldn't do when I was drinking. And that's what you're doing now. You're taking everything that you got from the program during all this time, and now you're putting that into being a father and a husband and providing a home for your daughter and a life and building a life. That's what it's all about. I mean, you could hide in AA. You could go to AA and say all the great things that everybody likes to hear and then neglect your family. You know, so, you know, you got to do what comes first. And so absolutely you're doing the right thing. And, someday you might go, you know, find yourself, going back to more meetings again, you know, that's what happened with me after I got married and everything and life changed and started getting more involved with AA to whereas now I'm pretty involved, but yeah.
You just made me think of something. Have you seen the film Thanks for Sharing?
No, I haven't.
It's got Mark Ruffalo in it. It wasn't a great film, but it was okay. And it's got Tim Robbins, and Mark Ruffalo is a sex addict. And I
remember that came out.
Yeah, and Tim Robbins, I think, is his AA sponsor, and it's kind of Tim Robbins' character is really big at being Mr. AA, but he's not very good. And maybe he's Mr. SA, you know, like Sex Addicts Anonymous or whatever. But it's kind of about how he's ignored his own family on some level too. So there's some real good aspects to that movie about the nitty gritty of what kind of goes on in 12-step recovery. I'd recommend that to anybody listening.
I'll definitely watch that. Definitely watch that.
It certainly was not a great movie, but it was very decent that way.
Oh, cool.
But it made me think about that because there's there's a way to use anything in an unhealthy manner, even something that's as great as AA for helping us, and I think religion too. I know my mom, really got involved in religion after, I don't know, we had a couple of losses in my family and my mom went towards religion.
Yeah.
And, I felt kind of abandoned by that, but, she thought she was doing a great thing. Mm-hmm. And that's what she needed at the time. But, I needed some more nurturing and parental attention than she was able to give at that time. So we can use anything that's seemingly good to not do our best sometimes. Right. And I've been confronted with that myself with having a child. Sure. It's like my priorities are changing.
Absolutely. And they should be. So. Well, I've enjoyed this. So our next one was going to be steps 8 and 9. Maybe we'll do them both together again. Again, these are steps that are divided up for no reason. You could do the steps 8 and 9 in one step, I think. Anyway.
Right. Well, it was interesting today too. I felt like we struggled to even talk about these 2 steps a little bit, but then when we start talking about personal stuff, it's like no problem, but it's like, it shows how awkward these 2 steps kind of are, I think. Yeah.
And I think everybody, if they're honest, will say the same thing that you said. When when you approach your sponsor, they don't really know what to say about how to do these steps. My sponsor said, read the 12 and 12 and help other people. That's okay.
Say the 7-step prayer, you're done. Just like the book says.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to go to a meeting next week here in Kansas City. We got some fun. Roger C is coming down.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. We're having our anniversary for our group, our 2-year anniversary, and we're having Roger come down to talk about the history of secularism in AA. And we sent out flyers to all the different AA groups in Kansas City. And I hope that they come. I'd like to get the traditional AAers out here to meet Roger and learn about secular AA. So we'll see. Be interesting to see what happens. So.
I've got it on my calendar, but it's always a last second decision whether I can make it or not. So you may see me.
That'd be fun. That'd be fun.
And I think maybe a friend of mine from Omaha is coming too.
Well, cool. Very cool. All right, Ben, I will talk to you later.
All right, John. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, that's it for another episode of AA Beyond Belief, the podcast. I hope you enjoyed the program. We have a very special episode coming up for you next week when Roger C. will be in Kansas City, Missouri to give a talk about the history of secularism in Alcoholics Anonymous. I think you'll enjoy this one. He's given the talk before, but he's going to put a special spin on it this time around. We'll see you next week in Kansas City, Mo.